Hi handsome and welcome to my 64th video. This time I have a follow-up to my gear guide that I made roughly 2 weeks ago. That video was about gear progression as a whole, going from Tuvala all the way to Edania, but a large part of it was the discussion, if you want to call it that, between whether you should go the Kharazad accessory route or whether you should buy Deboreka from the center market with some accessories in between your post-graduation gear and the Deberekas themselves. Since I have made this video, a couple things happened. First, BlueSquadron did respond to me basically calling him out in my original video. I will not really dwell that much on it. He basically doubled down, said that his route is better, and I will basically explain why he's wrong in this video, so you can use this to educate yourself as well. But on top of that, I guess as a result of me also reacting to his reaction, what has happened is that I had to explain multiple times on stream why Kharazad is actually worse and, more importantly, why it is slower in terms of progression than the Debo route, and why if you go the Kharazad, then you will be grinding in these low-end spots longer than if you went the Deboreka. And because I had to explain it many times, I decided to just make this video, combine it with the educational part, and also so I don't have to explain it on my stream many more times. There are a handful of things that I would like to address before we get into the Kharazad deep dive. First of all, there have been some people in the community who said that I'm like a Blade Bogus type character and that the only reason why I'm telling you to go Deberekas is because I have them sitting on the center market. Well, here is my entire history of this year, and as you can see, there is no Debereka enhancing. So no, I am not here to scam you by telling you to buy my Deberekas specifically. Second, I would just like to say, I have done this Debereka route myself, admittedly, before the combat overhaul, but I have done it even the more difficult way, where I didn't go Debo by Debo, but instead I just saved up 1.2 trillion at the time, because Deberekas were more expensive at the time as well, and then bought all 6 Deberekas at the same time. Sadly, there is no record of me doing this because I don't have a clip, but you just have to believe me. There is one more leftover piece of information from the gear guide that I have seen some people confused about in the comment section, and that is why I recommended you to go the Kharazad belt over the Kharazad necklace for your deck to Vala conversion. People have referenced by Septimus and they have also referenced BlueSquadron, and I have seen other content creators all recommend the necklace. However, I think that this has mostly to do with the fact that they are recommending the Kharazad route as a whole. Now, whether the Kharazad necklace is the best option for your Kharazad route, I will leave up in the air because it's not really what I'm here to do. I'm here to explain further why the Kharazad belt is always the best option if you go the center market Debereka route. And this is for 3 different reasons. First of all, if you go the Kharazad belt, you are gaining 1 more AP over the Kharazad necklace. This is because if you take the Kharazad belt and combine it with the Kaposia necklace, you will get 50 AP. If you do the same with a Kharazad necklace and a Kaposia belt, you will get 49. So that's reason number 1, you are getting better stats in the short term. Reason number 2 is basically the opposite, it is longevity. This is because when you are looking into upgrading your accessories, your necklace upgrade will be either the Ogre ring, the Latens, or even the Asadal, and all of them give you 35 AP, whereas the Kharazad had 32. If you are looking at the same level of enhancement for your belts, you're looking at either the Basilisk, Asadal again, or the Valtara, and as you can see, all of them have the same stats as the Kharazad, which means that you don't actually need to upgrade into this level of belt, saving you some extra money. Even if you want to skip the Ogre entirely, then you run into the same issue with Deberekas later on, because your first Debereka should always be the necklace, since it gives you the most amount of AP and is also the cheapest. So you are still getting rid of the Kharazad necklace the fastest. And the final thing is something I will be talking much later about in this video, and that is that it will allow you to reach Jordine, the first boss in Edania, sooner. So yeah, that's why the Kharazad belt is always going to be better, especially if you're going the center market route and not the Kharazad route. Now, one thing I should have possibly made more clear in my original video is that I am not against Kharazads entirely. I think that there are valid reasons as to why you might want to go Kharazad. My biggest issue with BlueSquadron's video and why I called him out specifically is that he paints Kharazad as this fast grind spot to grind spot stepwise progression when in reality it is anything but. And it's another reason why I decided to make this video. Now, let me just say quickly which reasons do I think constitute as the most valid. Reason number one is very simple. If you are spending money in the game, if you are paying to win, buying costumes to meld them into Crons and then using those Crons to enhance, Kharazad is going to be your best friend because you should never be croning the Deberekas in the first place. The other reason I can see is if you are a gambling addict. If you absolutely adore the enhancing itself in BDO and you like this Korean style RNG based progression, then having this dopamine rush every time you enhance might be enough of a reason for you to keep playing. That's pretty much about it. Make no mistake, this Kharazad versus Deberekas debate has never been about the idea of efficiency versus having fun in the game, because this is a completely red herring. It has nothing to do with the progression as a whole, because gear progression is not gameplay. You can absolutely go the quote-unquote fun Kharazad route and then only play as efficiently as you can and hate your life, or you can play the quote-unquote efficiency route and then spend your time AFK fishing and grinding in Sikraya lower because you simply like the spot. Those two things are not magically connected. You can grind efficiently and gear inefficiently and vice versa. What's more is that I would argue that in many cases, if you do gear efficiently, which means that you have to spend less money and therefore less time on your progression, that will actually free you up to play inefficiently because you will not have as much of a mountain to climb. The other thing is BDO is a grinding game and you will be grinding no matter what. This is again something that people on the Kharazad side do not really talk to you about. They only ever say this, oh, you're gonna spend 100 hours in Honglim, you're gonna spend 50 hours in Hogsmeade and whatever. But they never tell you how long you're gonna be grinding in Kharazad, because if they actually did, you would have actually seen that you would be spending more time in those spots with Kharazad. It is all smoke and mirrors, it is all fabrication, and to prove this, let's look at the first point of comparison between my center market route and the Kharazad equivalent. Now, I do not really like calling the Pendebo route the Pendebo route, so I'm just going to be calling it the Central Market route. This is because if you just call it the Pendebo, you kind of think that there's nothing in between, but there absolutely is, and it's the gear that you see on your screen right now. Yes, you can go Ted Debos if you really want to, but it is going to be more expensive, and I do recommend this gear that you see on your screen in terms of accessories now. The reason we are starting at the 1130 AP spots, as you might have noticed, is because there really is no point in talking about the Kharazad or this center market route before 1130, for the simple reason that you don't really need either one. If you do your journals, if you do your catch-up gear, you will be able to grind places like Jade Forest and Honglim Base with just your basic consumable setup and half a crystal page. One point of contention at the very early stages in your gear progression is going to be the fact that your AP comes from multiple sources, not just your gear, and your gear really only starts taking off the later you go into your gear progression. You obviously have your consumables, these are the ones that I'm using. I will make a dedicated video on Deep Sea, by the way, and why Deep Sea is probably not as good as people may think, and I will also be using these crystals. Again, you can use different crystals if you want, but chances are that the earlier into your gear progression you are, the worse crystals you have. So this is the Kharazad equivalent that I am running with. Final point, just so you know how I got to these numbers that I'm going to be showing. Of course, all numbers from the center market that you can buy will be based on the center market as of this date, so those numbers might have changed. When it comes to the Kharazad, I am using Byrock's enhancement sheet. This is because it also includes spell stacks on all the other costs on top of just the Crons, which is what I used the first time. The only addition that I have done this time is that I have rounded up all of his averages. This is for the very simple reason that you can't do half of a tap, so I have just modified it so we actually land on prime numbers and it is closer to reality. Now we have all the numbers that I'm working with here. Obviously we have vendor Crons. I've already talked about this in my original video. You can go and watch that. Simply put, most often than not, costume Crons will have a conversion to real cash rather than silver. The rest here, of course, once again, EU market price as of making this video, or at least this part of it. Now, I also have all the other Cron values here. You don't really have to worry about this one. What matters to us is the total cost. In order for me not to lose my mind, I have done a lazy thing and I have just did the good RNG, which is average divided by 2, and bad RNG, which is average times 2. This is not accurate. The biggest problem is that I'm also halving or doubling the cost of the fell stacks, so in reality these numbers might go up and down respectively, but I think that for the purpose of this video this is going to be good enough, and I don't think I need to go that much more in detail about this. Now here you also have the prices of the base Kharazad. You can see that they cost roughly 5 billion silver each. Kinda depends on which accessory you are making, because the base Deberekas have different prices. But most of the price will come from your magical shards and your essences of dawn, which I'm using EU prices for. Of course this is gonna be different on other servers, but then again all of these items are gonna be different on other servers, including the Pandebos themselves. So it's going to be kinda similar, maybe a little bit different. For the purposes of this video, we are running with EU prices. All of this finally brings us to the first point of comparison. I know it took us this long. As you can see, even with the good RNG bracket, you are still spending over 20 billion silver more to get to the same level, with the average Kharazad route costing more than double the price of the center market pre-Deboreka accessories. I was actually curious to see just how likely a person is to even get to this good RNG bracket in this place, and as it turns out, you are roughly 5 times more likely to be hit by a lightning than you are to get this good RNG bracket. So I would not really count on it too much here. Now, like I just said, AP comes from multiple sources, with them becoming fewer and fewer the longer you go in your gear progression. So if you want to argue that you will get your crystals earlier or you will not get a Wel's Heart until later on, I think that it is fair to say that Kharazad allows you to not have to look elsewhere. This will often come at an increased cost, as we will see later on, but for now it is a fair argument. For the sake of this video, I will assume that you will be able to get a Wel's Heart, and you will also get the Pen Black Star, as well as a better crystal page, including Ultimate Macalots and Brutal Decimation crystals, which are, as of right now, not in stock on EU. I will be doing this on both sides for full fairness, and these upgrades will allow you to grant the 1180 AP spots, so you don't have to do any further upgrades in terms of your gear. Now, I am doing this because next I want to talk about the concept of tangible progression and explain a little bit more why this quote-unquote stepwise progression doesn't actually work in practice in post-combat overhaul BDO. This is for the very simple reason that you do need to hit certain AP numbers to be able to grant spots in a given AP bracket. To illustrate this, at this AP that you see on your screen, I am able to grind the 1180 AP spots. Now, if I take the Kharazad route and I enhance my earrings and belt to pen, I am still grinding 1180 AP spots. It only really is at full hex Kharazad after I have enhanced 10 separate times, which would have cost me over 150 billion silver, so anywhere between 100 and 200 hours of grinding, that I am able to grind the next AP bracket, which is 1295. This is why you shouldn't be focusing on your Kharazad at this stage, or accessories in general, but rather you should be focusing on other ways to get AP, because remember, gear progression at its very core is getting the most amount of stats for the lowest costs. So, in order to get to the next bracket, which once again is the 1295, what you should do instead of upgrading your Kharazad is focus on getting a sovereign weapon. This should in almost every case be either your succession or awakening weapon based on whichever spec you're playing. Not your offhand, okay? Do not get your offhand as your first sovereign. Both the succession or awakening and the offhand weapons at try give you the exact same AP increase over their corresponding pen Black Star. The difference here is that the offhand requires 20,000 Kafras on top of the second pen Black Star to upgrade to it, but the succession or awakening weapons do not. This means that you are saving between 30 and 40 billion silver based on your server if you go your main weapon first. Furthermore, every enhancement level of your main weapon, so either succession or awakening, from try onwards gives you 2 AP per level, but the offhand only gives you 1 AP per level for the same cost and the same chance of enhancing. The only reason why you would ever consider your offhand as your first sovereign is only if you are at this point still undecided about your class. There is absolutely no other reason to go offhand as your first sovereign. Now, with your first sovereign weapon acquired, we now have another concept that we need to talk about, another argument for the Kharazad. This is the idea that Kharazad accessories are faster than the Deboreka Central Market route because you get free Crons. Here is the fun part first. To get to the level on screen, which was the 1130 AP, even if we remove the cost of Crons, you are still paying more money on average to get to the same level than if you just bought the yellow accessories from the center market. Second, this is on average almost 20,000 Crons that you have just spent just to get here. In other words, that's nearly all of the free Crons that they gave you at Heidel Ball and that they will most likely give you at Calphion Ball this December. And third, these Crons might have been given to you for free, but that doesn't mean that they have no value. In fact, you can use these Crons for other things, such as the decked Tuvala weapon and armor, each of which costs roughly 4 to 6,000 Crons each on average, depending on whether you rotapped to Oct or not. More importantly for this comparison, however, you can use those free Crons on your sovereign weapons. So with those 20k Crons, you would be able most likely to hit up to pen sovereign weapon. So even if you want to use this argument of I'm just gonna use my free Crons, they will equalize at one point or another, making that point completely moot. With all of that yapping out of the way, we now have our pen sovereign weapon one way or another, allowing us to grind the 1295 AP spots. And we are now looking into the next bracket, which is the 1350 AP. We finally got a second point of comparison in the video, and that is the Kharazad needed to get here versus the first pen Deboreka, which is always going to be your necklace because it's the cheapest and gives you the most AP for the cost. As of recording this, a pen Debo necklace currently costs 111 billion silver. Now, the price of the neck for us actually isn't that, but a bit lower than it, because we now have a pen ogre ring that we no longer need for anything, meaning that we can either just sell it as it is, or melt it down into 300 essences of dawn and sell those instead. I am going with the more expensive option, which right now are the essences, meaning that the pen Deboreka necklace is now, in essence, pardon the pun, 16 billion cheaper. The Kharazad equivalent here I'm using is with the same lightstone and consumable combo, but even then you can see that if we started getting gear from this point onwards, Kharazad would be comparable, if not better, with some good RNG on your side. And this would be even more in the Kharazad favor if the final goal was 1350 AP, since you can skip the necklace enhancing in favor of something like the all-out attack lightstone set, which will undeniably be cheaper than the pen debos in most scenarios. However, the 1350 AP bracket is actually quite a bad bracket in terms of grind spots. The Dekia 1 Owlens is one of, if not the worst spot in the entire game, and both of the other spots in this bracket are either on par or even worse than the spots that came before it. If you just want more variety in your grind, this might be good enough for you. But you are absolutely not making more money per hour here, even if you were to somehow get here faster. But even then isn't the full picture, because on top of all of this, since Kharazads were so far behind in terms of how much more money you had to spend on them to get to the previous brackets, if we look at this gear holistically, even with the all-out attack Lightstone set, the Kharazad is roughly 60 billion more expensive on average, which is going to be about half, assuming that you get decently lucky at this point, while average up until now. I kept the good RNG money here just out of curiosity, so if you are wondering what your odds are to be on the good RNG, and I think even on the bad RNG side, up until this point, it is about 1 in 2.5 million, which means that if Google is to be believed and all of the 55 million registered players in BDO and Kharazad, only 22 of them would get to either one of these ends of these brackets. Where this gets even more interesting is the very next bracket, which is 1395 AP, because the situation that we just talked about nearly flips on its head, because it is now the Deboreka route that can utilize the Lightstone set to reach Tungrad faster, and you are now looking at over 100 billion silver deficit between the two routes in the favor of the Deborekas. And unlike the 1350 AP bracket, the 1395 includes Tungrad Ruins, which is actually much better than the previous spots, especially now that Origins are kind of drying up on EU and maybe they are on other markets as well. And so getting here faster with the Deborekas is going to be much more valuable. The next bracket is really just one spot, and it's Dokkebi Forest sitting at 1445 AP. Here we are once again going back to sourcing AP from other places. This time it will be the Offhand Sovereign, which will be cheaper than both the Deboreka ring on the center market route, which would be the next upgrade, as well as the enhancing of Kharazad to get to the same AP level. This means that the next point of comparison is actually DSR at 1490 total AP. Now, I put the Sovereign Offhand on the Kharazad side to TET to reach the AP cap, but if you are still using the Lightstone sets from the Tungrads, you most likely do not need it, so you can subtract it from there. I did kind of forget to mention in the Tungrad segment, you can also always use the Demi-Human or whatever other species damage Lightstone set that you have, if you do not like losing the defensive stats from the all-out attack or even watch your back Lightstones. The jury, in my opinion, is still out on how much the special damage actually matters past your AP cap. You do gain 6 AP with the Demi-Human Lightstone set, but if you are over the cap, that actually doesn't mean anything. To be honest, I'm already doing enough maths in this video alone, so I will not go into this further, maybe in another video. Now, yes, it is around this point that Kharazad does start catching up a little bit. Mind you, this is after you spend an extra 100 to 150 hours just to get to this point, so realistically, the guy buying Debos is going to be here much sooner than you are. But I do understand that the Kharazad boys need any victory that they can get. As you can see, from the very beginning at 950 total AP all the way to here, which is 1490, the center market, or the Deboreka route if you will, absolutely smokes Kharazad out of the water every single step of the way. But there is one thing that I'm sure all the Kharazad lovers were waiting for me to get to: Edania boss fights. More specifically, Jordine. You cannot enter any Edania boss without having full red or purple gear. This means that the center market route is done for. Unlucky, GG, you got me. Except, not really. All you really need here are 3 dry dummy Kharazads to fill in the empty slots. Now, I do admit, this can be a little counterintuitive, but if you really care about the fight, all you need is 3 Kharazats, which will cost you around 25 billion on average, and even with this diversion, you are still better off and much faster than the full Kharazad route. Of course, if you enhance your Sovereign of Hand to Pen or your main hand to Hex or higher, you can bring this cost down even further by Pry, Earrings and Tri-Ring or even full Pry, but that is besides the point. Full Kharazad is what we are running with, and by the way, this is why you should be getting your Tet Kharazad belt, because we are still going to be using it to reach Jordine. That is how goated the Tet Kharazad belt as your catch-up actually is. Alright, we are reaching near the end. The next bracket is 1540 AP. This unlocks Dekia 2, Ash Forest and Owlands, as well as Unlucky Pig Cave. Now, I will stay true to what I said before, the most gains for the lowest costs. So here, we are finishing our crystals on the Kharazad side. Why this is important is that if you do buy Pendebos and convert it to a Kharazad accessory, you also get a free Jin Dawn AP crystal. You do not get that crystal if you do go the Kharazad route, so you have to buy it. Up until now on the Kharazad side, I was using the Won crystals that cost like 70 million each on the center market. So I just didn't include them in the numbers because you can also just get them from Honglin base if you do end up grinding there. Even though I could have. And yes, you can say that I am upgrading the Jin crystals a little bit too late. I think that there is an argument to be made for them to be upgraded to at around Tungrad Ruins at the earliest, where it could realistically replace one of the Hex Kharazad upgrades. But the difference between those two is around 2 billion silver on average, so I think that we do end up splitting hairs here. The other crystal upgrade that you don't really have to do with the Pendebos, at least not right now, are your Void crystals. These will once again be cheaper than any Kharazad upgrade, giving you a total of 8 AP over their regular counterpart for a combined cost of anywhere between 10 to 12 billion silver based on your server. Again, these are the absolutely cheapest ways to get your AP up if you do want this stepwise progression, and it is just about at this point that Kharazad does catch up to the Deboreka route, especially if you do it like this. Admittedly, if your idea is to give advice to new players because in your mind they are just stupid and even after 500 hours of playing the game they will not really understand the systems, then doing all of this in this specific order is undeniably confusing. Which is where I think we need to talk about this stepwise progression concept in a more holistic manner. Simply put, if you want step-by-step progression that is not overwhelming to the new players, you do not go Kharazad. You buy your items from the center market and you do the route that I have laid out, or whatever other similar route you may have been recommended by other content creators out there who do not recommend Kharazads. And this is for a very simple reason. You only ever have to worry about one item at a time if you go the center market route. Let me show you what I mean. Once you get your catch-up gear, your first goal is 1 Jordine ring. Then the second Jordine ring. After you are done, you get your first Desto earring, then your second Desto earring, then the Pen Ogre ring, and now you are done with accessories and don't have to worry about them for quite some time. Now you can focus on the other ways to get your AP up. Your crystals, your lightstone sets, your sovereign weapons. And after you are done with them, if you really want, you can still get your second sovereign weapon, but you can now fully be focusing on Deboreka's, one Deboreka at a time. At every single step of your gear journey, the moment you finish one goal, you are presented with another, very clear goal to follow next, because all you really need is just reach the silver on the center market. You don't have to worry about math, which upgrade is the best, and if you should enhance your earrings to pen, or your necklace to sap, or if you should get AP from other places other than your Kharazad because it might be cheaper. Buying your Pendeborekas and all the other accessories is as straightforward as you can realistically get in BDO. But let us finish the final steps of the video, Edania and beyond. By the way, I know some people will mention Distos taking away DP and whatnot, but at least according to Garmov, you are still above the recommended DP even for Aetherion Castle, the first grand spot in Edania. And this spot is designed to be grinded without either the Edania armor or your Sovereign Offhand. So if you are doing Jordine by this point, you have at least full Fallen God armors, and consumables like the Harmony Draft will also make you extra tanky as well. So I would say that any devs here will most likely be due to skill issue, not because of gear issue. Obviously, you can make up for the lack of one with the other, but that's a topic for another day. You guessed it, the fastest way to get here with the center market route is to buy a Deboreka belt, which is currently sitting at 151 billion silver. Everyone knows that Kharazad is extremely top heavy, and at this point you are getting into the ugly part of Kharazad enhancing, so even though you have been kind of getting closer to the Deboreka counterpart, at this point you have truly lost it. The closest AP you can get to will be something like this, and I'm once again putting a Sovereign in there since it will be the cheapest option for at least one level of enhancing. This puts the cheapest upgrade in the Kharazad route to 200 billion silver, so congratulations. I hope you enjoyed Dokkebi 2 Ash Forest because you are going to spend an extra 50 hours in there. And finally we have Orzekea. Now, this place is an animal spot, so species damage doesn't work here, meaning you will need more AP to grind here than in Aetherion Castle. How much more AP, you ask? Well, going the center market Deboreka route, you already know that we are getting you an earring. But you also want to get another upgrade on your Dead Sovereign Offhand if you haven't done so already. Combined, this is roughly 190 billion silver, and yes, Orzekea recommended total DP is higher than the one you will have with your remaining wanted disto. However, this is only 5 total DP less than if you got a Kharazad in the same spot, so I really don't think it is making any difference at this point. Kharazad is still losing the race by roughly 40 billion silver or about 20 hours of grinding. Which leads us to the final step. NOV Kharazad across the board on both routes. Of course, this wasn't even a full comparison, since I tried to be fair and always pick the fastest route across the board, since that is what this stepwise progression is supposed to be doing in the eyes of people like BlueSquadron who propose it so much. Which led me to make some detours on the Kharazad route, and a pure head-to-head would look even worse for the Kharazad in general. Even then, when you look at the two paths holistically, you will need to grind for roughly half a trillion silver more, which will translate to anywhere between 300 to 700 hours of grinding if you go the Kharazad route. If this is not evidence enough that Kharazads are a scam and that the people who tell you to do them for the sake of having a quote-unquote faster grind spot to grind spot progression are nothing more than snake oil salesmen who have no idea how the progression in BDO works, I do not know what is. As you can see, at every single stage of progression, from the very first point of comparison, you are grinding more hours using the Kharazad route than you would be if you just bought the items on the center market. That's the entire deep dive done. I hope I managed to debunk all the pro Kharazad arguments that people have been using in my comments and maybe you have seen elsewhere. At the end of the day, it's just a video game, it's nothing serious, so if you still want to do Kharazad after watching this entire video, be my guest. I just want you to be informed at the end of the day. So thank you for watching, especially if you are still convinced to go Kharazad, past this point handsome, and I will see you in the next video. Now, initially the last part of this video was supposed to be a further response to Blue, going over his reaction to my initial calling him out, as well as his first gear guide that he made a couple weeks ago, but I have decided to not include it in this video and just cut it out completely, so I'm sorry if you were looking forward to that one. The reason for this is very simple. I think that this video does its job well enough, just going through the claim that Kharazad is faster and that you will progress so much faster if you go grind spot to grind spot, which I think that you can clearly tell by now that it's not the case. And even though there are enough jabs to Blue in this video, I think that's good enough. I don't think I need to push it much further, and I would kindly ask everyone watching to not push it further either. Now, what I will say to Blue specifically, I do know that he's most likely not going to watch this and he's definitely not going to respond to this, is that I'm just disappointed. Because if you are an older subscriber of mine, you probably know, but I did have some sort of a history with Blue. I did make a video about Opera PvP. That video had sort of a mixed response. He was not very happy with it, he really didn't like it, but I think that he did go too far, and I do think so to this day. I even made a 90-minute long response going through his reaction and basically going through all the bad faith arguments and ad hominem attacks made against me to the point where I really felt like I needed to defend. Something that I didn't have in the first two reactions that he made to my content, because this wasn't the first one either. He did agree with me initially. He apologized, he took the video down, that comment is still pinned under the response video, so I thought that this was all water under the bridge. And yes, granted, I do not agree with many of Blue's takes, but I think that's ultimately fine, and I do try to make the distinction between a person and their claims. So none of my attacks on Blue's takes were attacks on Blue's character. I hope this makes sense. But to then see him go to my stream and try this same strategy with apologizing and trying to play the nice guy again and basically saying that he did it out of respect for me because I asked for it and he was giving me a platform and blah blah blah. After his first words about me being that I just hate him because he dared disagree with me in one of my takes. That's just something that I cannot stand. I do not know if this comes from his character on stream. I do not know if this is just how he is, if he just like whenever he gets pushed he just retreats to this type of character. I don't know. At the end of the day, all I wanted was for Blue to amend his guide and tell people what needed to be told. He did kind of do this in a very backhanded manner, but ultimately he did just double down. So I did fail on my initial calling him out, and there's no further reason for me to push this drama further. And all I can say to Blue specifically is fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And yeah, that's all I have for you today, handsome. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the Kharazad noob trap. I'm sorry about the Blue tangent. If you still want to go Kharazad, be my guest. But stop drinking the Kool-Aid of Kharazad being faster progression, as you are lying not only to everyone else, but most importantly, to yourself. Remember to like and subscribe, and enjoy your grind.